I got to the hospital, and everything changed forever. It began with a voice that I never expected to hear that night. Elon Musk's words had echoed through the airwaves only hours before, words that felt strangely prophetic even though he had spoken them in a different context. Humanity only grows when it confronts the unknown. The moment you face what you fear most, that's when evolution begins. Those words clung to me as I stepped into the sterile white corridors of the hospital, unaware that my life was about to split in two, the before and the after. I had come in for something that seemed ordinary, something that appeared manageable, but what happened next shattered every illusion I held about reality, destiny, and the forces that watch us from beyond the veil. The air smelled of antiseptic. Machines beeped faintly in the distance. Nurses in light blue scrubs moved like shadows, some with tired eyes, some with hurried steps. I clutched the small bag in my hand, the essentials I thought I'd need for a short stay. But deep inside me, something whispered, "You won't walk out the same." When I first lay on that cold bed, staring at the fluorescent lights above, I thought I was simply stepping into another chapter of medical routine. But I was wrong. This was the doorway to an unraveling mystery, one that would weave together the physical and the spiritual, the seen and unseen. The doctor came in, his face kind yet unreadable. He explained the procedures, the scans, the tests. His voice was calm, but underneath I sensed a gravity. He knew more than he was telling me. And so, the night fell, and the room grew quiet. That's when the first encounter happened. I remember the sound of wings, not physical wings that stirred the air, but something deeper. A vibration, a resonance. My body was weak, yet my spirit became hyper-aware. The corners of the room shimmered faintly, like heat waves rising from asphalt on a summer's day. And then, a presence. Archangel Michael. I cannot explain how I knew it was him, but every fiber of my being recognized his essence. Strength beyond measure, authority wrapped in gentleness, and a blazing light that pierced through the heaviness of the hospital air. He stood there, not in a way that fleshly eyes could capture fully, but in a form both real and unreal. "Do not fear," the presence whispered. "This night begins your awakening. What you thought was suffering will be the key to vision. What you thought was loss will become gain. What you thought was the end will reveal a greater beginning." Tears streamed from my eyes. I could not move, and yet I felt as though I had already begun walking towards something eternal. That night, I drifted between consciousness and visions. At one moment, I was watching the Ford drip beside me, and the next, I was standing on a shoreline that stretched infinitely, waves crashing in silver light. Angels moved in ranks upon the waters, their wings catching reflections like fire. I heard songs, ancient songs, words not of any language I knew but carrying meanings that stirred the deepest part of my soul. When I awoke, morning had arrived, and sunlight pushed its way through the blinds. A nurse checked my vitals. She smiled faintly but hesitated as though she, too, sensed something unusual in the room. I almost asked her if she heard the songs, but I stopped. How could I explain? Yet the visions did not stop. Over the next hours, they deepened. I saw memories of my past replaying, but this time through a different lens. Every mistake, every regret, every choice that had led me here was shown, but instead of condemnation, there was clarity. The hospital bed had become a portal, and what I thought was weakness was in fact the opening of the greatest revelation of my life. But the revelation did not stop with me. In the corridors, I began to notice others, patients, families, doctors, who seemed to be caught in invisible battles. A mother weeping quietly beside her child's bed. An old man staring blankly, waiting for news that might crush his spirit. A young man pacing, afraid to hear what diagnosis awaited him. Their pain was not hidden from heaven. I began to feel it, as though the veil between their souls and mine had thinned. Archangel Michael's words returned, "This night begins your awakening." I realized then, the hospital was not merely a place of sickness and recovery. It was a battleground of hope and despair, life and death, faith and fear. And in this battleground, angels moved unseen, carrying strength, whispering courage, guarding souls as they faced eternity. What I didn't know yet was that my own story was about to collide with theirs in ways I could never have scripted. My hospital stay would not end in mere recovery. It would end in a mission, an assignment that would change not only my life but ripple outward to countless others. But before the mission, there was a breaking. And the breaking began that very afternoon, when the doctor walked back in with papers in his hand, his expression solemn, his voice steady but heavy with truth. Things are not as simple as we thought. The words hung in the air heavier than the walls around me. Things are not as simple as we thought. My heart sank, though my face stayed still. I could hear the machines humming faintly, their steady rhythm suddenly turning into a reminder that every second mattered. The doctor placed the papers on the small rolling table beside my bed. His eyes met mine, not cold, not indifferent, but the eyes of someone carrying truth they wish they didn't have to deliver. "We've run the tests. There are complications we need to address immediately," he said, his voice controlled but laced with unspoken weight. Complications. That word echoed inside me like a bell ringing down a hollow corridor. Complications meant uncertainty, meant danger, meant that the hospital stay I thought would be short might now turn into something much longer, something life-defining. I swallowed hard. Questions rose in my throat, but before I could form them, he placed a hand gently on the railing of my bed. "We'll do everything possible. You're not alone in this." Then he walked out, leaving me with silence. But it wasn't silence. As soon as the door closed, the room seemed to shift. The light grew brighter, not from the lamp above but from somewhere unseen. And there again was the presence, stronger this time. Archangel Michael stood near the foot of my bed, his radiance folding around the sterile walls like a shield. "Do not let fear write your story," he said, his voice resonating beyond sound. "Fear is the lie. Truth is that you are held. Truth is that you are chosen for a greater path. And though this body may tremble, the spirit within you is being reforged like steel in fire." I wanted to speak, but tears were my only words. Then the vision opened again. I was no longer in the hospital bed but standing in a vast hall of light. Pillars rose high, not of stone but of living energy, shimmering with colors I cannot describe. At the center was a throne, not empty, but veiled in brilliance so intense that my eyes could not fully behold it. Around it stood angels in countless ranks, their forms blazing like stars, their wings stretching like horizons. I fell to my knees. One of them stepped forward, not Michael but another, his presence softer, his light gentler, like the calm after a storm. "You are being shown what many never see," the angel spoke. "Not to glorify yourself, but so that you may testify. The hospital is not your prison, it is your gateway. And those who are bound in sorrow here will hear hope through your voice." I lifted my head, though trembling. Why me? Because suffering breaks the walls of pride. And only when walls are broken can the eternal flow in. Then in an instant, I was back. The 4 beeped, the clock ticked, the air returned heavy with antiseptic. But I was not the same. Hours passed. Nurses moved in and out. They spoke gently, checked vitals, adjusted machines. Yet I noticed something I hadn't before, the faint glow around them. It wasn't visible in the natural sense, but in the spirit I could see it. Some glowed faintly like flickering candles, weary from endless shifts but still burning with compassion. Others shone brighter, as if guided by unseen hands. They were not just staff, they were instruments in a battle much larger than themselves. Later that evening, the room grew quieter. I could hear faint cries from down the hall, a child perhaps. Then a voice of comfort, a lullaby, breaking through pain. The sound pierced me, reminding me that life inside these walls was raw, unmasked, stripped of all illusions. And somehow, in that rawness, heaven was closer. My own body grew weak, exhaustion pressing down. I closed my eyes. And again, visions came. This time, I stood at a river, its waters glowing silver beneath a sky of twilight. On the opposite side, I saw people, faces I recognized, people from my past, some alive, some who had passed on. They were smiling, radiant, calling out without words but with love. I longed to cross, but Michael appeared beside me, his sword drawn, the blade of light humming with power. "Not yet," he said firmly. "There is work to be done on this side. Do not seek escape when your assignment has only begun." I bowed my head. Something in me wanted to fight, to resist, but his words struck truth into my very bones. I was alive for a reason. My hospital stay was not an accident. When I awoke again, it was midnight. The hallway was quiet, but I sensed movement not of people, but of beings unseen. Angels patrolling like guardians. Demons lurking like shadows, whispering despair into the minds of patients. The war of eternity was alive within these walls. And then I heard it, the voice of a man 2 rooms down, crying, "God, please don't let me die tonight." My heart broke. For a moment, I forgot my own pain. I whispered a prayer, not knowing if my words carried weight, but as soon as they left my lips, I saw it, light moving swiftly down the corridor, entering his room. A surge of peace followed, almost tangible, washing through the sterile air. That was the moment I knew, I was not merely a patient. I was a witness. And witnesses are called to speak. But before I could grasp how, the breaking intensified. My body trembled, my chest grew heavy, alarms suddenly blared on the machines. Nurses rushed in, the doctor soon after, their voices sharp with urgency. I was slipping, fast. Darkness closed in. And in that darkness, a choice appeared before me. Two paths, one leading to eternal rest, the other back to the pain, the hospital bed, the mission. Choose, Michael's voice thundered. I gasped, reaching, not with hands but with spirit. I chose. And everything changed. The darkness receded like a tide, pulling back to reveal the sterile white of the hospital room, but I was no longer the same. My body lay weak, trembling from the near collapse, yet my mind, my soul, burned with clarity that I could not have imagined. The doctor's face hovered above me, pale, anxious. Your vitals, they're stabilizing. But we need to keep monitoring. Whatever happened just now, it was extreme. I didn't answer. My focus was elsewhere. The presence had returned, Archangel Michael, radiant, unwavering, his gaze holding me accountable and yet embracing me. You have chosen the path of endurance, he said. Not for glory, not for recognition, but to become a beacon for those who cannot see. Every soul here depends on the courage you summon now. I felt my chest tighten as I tried to comprehend. How could one person, lying on a hospital bed, make a difference in a place filled with pain, despair, and suffering? Yet his presence made it clear, the mission was not in grandeur but in the subtle acts of spirit. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The hospital, normally a place of monotony, became alive with unseen activity. Shadows moved where no one walked, whispers floated in the corridors like wind through leaves. Angels, dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands, glided through the hallways, their light soft, protective, sometimes fierce when danger approached. I saw flashes of unseen forces attempting to feed fear into the hearts of patients, yet each time, light surged, a battle playing out beyond human eyes. I realized then that my near-death experience had opened a doorway, a window that allowed me to perceive what others could not. The hospital was not merely a building, it was a nexus where life and death, hope and despair, met in constant flux. And I had been chosen, not by chance, but by design, to witness and, in some small way, to intervene. Later, a nurse entered with a tray, her steps careful, her voice gentle. Time for some water. She paused, noticing my gaze. Are you feeling all right? Yes, I whispered, though my voice trembled. I've never felt more alive. Her smile was kind, but I sensed she could not fully grasp the depth of what I had experienced. Perhaps few could. Yet in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Transformation often happens silently, in ways invisible to the world, before manifesting outwardly. As I lay back, the ceiling above seemed to ripple, and another vision unfolded. I was no longer in the hospital but in a vast cathedral of light, its walls composed of what looked like living energy. At the center, a great throne pulsed with brilliance. Surrounding it were beings of immeasurable beauty and authority, angels whose wings spanned horizons I could barely comprehend. One angel approached me, a being of light softer than Michael yet radiating warmth that enveloped every fear. You have been granted sight, not for comfort, but for responsibility. The hospital is a battlefield, and your life is now intertwined with those who dwell here. You will speak hope. You will radiate courage. And through you, light will reach those who believe all is lost. I could only nod, overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. Returning to reality, the night stretched onward. Sounds of quiet suffering echoed through the corridors. A child crying in pain, a mother whispering prayers, a man clutching his chest in fear. And yet, each moment was punctuated by a presence I could sense but not fully see: protection, guidance, intervention from forces unseen. Hours later, the doctor returned with news that altered the course of everything. The tests show a rare complication. It's not typical, and standard procedures may not suffice. I felt a shiver of fear, yet Michael's presence steadied me. "This is not the end," he said softly. "This is the beginning of your role. Through this, you will witness miracles, not always grand, not always obvious, but miracles nonetheless." The next days blurred between medical interventions and spiritual revelations. Every beep of a machine, every footstep in the hallway, became a reminder of the fragile line between life and death. Patients and families moved through cycles of hope and despair, yet I began to perceive subtle shifts: a hand held, a whispered word, a glance that conveyed compassion. These were small acts, yet I felt their ripples in ways that defied ordinary understanding. One evening, the child in the next room, whom I had noticed days before, began to stabilize. The monitors, once erratic, became steady. And in that moment, I saw it: a light briefly flickered above the child's bed, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. I understood then that angels had intervened, yet the room had been prepared, in part, by the collective hope and courage of those around. I began to act intentionally, offering words to fellow patients, encouragement to nurses and families. Small acts, but infused with something beyond human effort. And every time, the light, the presence, responded. The hospital, once merely a place of waiting and treatment, had become a living tapestry of spiritual warfare and divine intervention. Then came the night that changed everything. I was resting when the alarms suddenly screamed, urgent, unrelenting. The staff rushed, the corridors flooded with movement, and I realized someone's life was hanging by a thread. My body shook, my mind raced, but within, I felt the calm, unshakable presence of Michael. "You will not falter," he said. "Extend your spirit. Let courage be your hands, hope your breath." I focused, not on fear, not on panic, but on the thread of connection that bound all souls in the hospital. I whispered prayers, not words, but feelings, vibrations of love and life. And slowly, imperceptibly, the monitors steadied. The crisis passed. A nurse glanced at me, confusion and awe in her eyes. Did you just?" I only shook my head, knowing that some battles are invisible, victories silent, miracles unfolding beyond human comprehension. That night, I understood my true calling. The hospital was never just a place of illness, it was a crucible of transformation. And I, though weak in body, had been strengthened in spirit. And I knew, the story had only just begun. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, soft and golden, yet everything felt different. The hospital no longer appeared merely as a place of sterile walls and quiet suffering. It had become a living entity, breathing with the hopes, fears, and prayers of those within it. And I felt, in every fiber of my being, that I was a conduit, part observer, part participant, part guardian. The nurse who had brought me water days before entered, her steps quieter than usual. She paused, sensing something in me had shifted. "You look different," she said, a faint tremor of curiosity in her voice. I smiled faintly. "I feel different," I replied, though even that sounded inadequate. Words were failing me, as if language could never capture the depth of what had happened. Hours passed, each filled with moments that tested and strengthened me in ways I could not have imagined. I moved through the corridors, offering quiet encouragement to patients and families. Sometimes it was just a glance, a hand on a shoulder, a whispered word of hope, but the effect was unmistakable. Machines beeped with steadiness where they had faltered, anxious hearts calmed, despair seemed less suffocating. But it wasn't just the visible transformations that mattered. I began to perceive the invisible. Shadows that moved unnaturally along walls. Vibrations that spoke of presence, both protective and malevolent. I could sense the tug-of-war over souls, the quiet struggle that took place beyond human awareness. And I realized with growing clarity that my role was no longer passive observation. I was part of the battle now. Late that night, the room grew unnervingly still. The hum of machines, usually comforting, now seemed to pulse with a rhythm I could almost interpret. Michael appeared once again, his presence filling the room with a weightless strength that made my fears shrink into insignificance. "Tonight," he said, "you will witness a test. Not of your body, not even entirely of your spirit, but of your resolve. The hospital is a crucible, and the souls within it are in flux. Your choice is to intervene, to extend your courage beyond fear." Before I could ask what he meant, the alarms blared. A room down the hall, the same one where the child had been recovering, had fallen into crisis. The monitors flashed erratically, warning of imminent danger. Nurses and doctors rushed, but there was a tension in the air, a sense that this event was beyond mere medical emergency. I rose from my bed, my body weak but my spirit surging. Michael's presence guided me, not with words but with a sensation, a pulse of energy I could feel along my arms, my chest, my core. I whispered prayers, not simply for healing, but for courage, for protection, for the intervention of forces unseen. As I approached the child's room, I felt a shadow retreating, a presence of despair, of fear, that had been feeding on the suffering. And with it, a wave of light surged, pure and unwavering, emanating not from any earthly source but from Michael's guiding force through me. The monitors stabilized, the child's breaths grew steady, and a calm that was almost tangible settled over the room. A nurse glanced at me, awe in her eyes. "How?" I could only shake my head. Some victories are silent. Some battles are unseen. Some miracles unfold in ways that defy human understanding. From that night onward, I began to see the hospital in a new light. Each patient, each doctor, each family member became part of a network of souls, connected in ways that were invisible but deeply real. My own recovery became secondary to the mission unfolding around me, to act as a vessel of hope, courage, and unseen intervention. Days passed, each marked by small miracles. The elderly man down the hall, who had been waiting anxiously for test results, finally smiled when news arrived that his condition was improving. The young man pacing in fear found solace in the quiet words I shared. Each act, though minor in the eyes of the world, carried weight in the spiritual realm. And then came the moment that changed everything again. I awoke to a vision, not in sleep but in the waking world. I was standing in a vast, illuminated hall, surrounded by angels whose wings stretched infinitely. At the center, a throne pulsed with radiant energy, and before it, I saw glimpses of souls whose lives were at critical junctures. Michael appeared beside me. "You have done well," he said. "But now comes the moment of greater revelation. Not all will see the light in the same way. Some will resist, some will falter. Your task is to extend the light, even where it is most unlikely to be received. This is the essence of courage, unwavering, selfless, and eternal." I nodded, understanding that the hospital was merely a microcosm of the larger battle, that my role, though small in the eyes of the world, carried infinite consequences. Over the following week, I moved from room to room, guided by intuition and unseen forces. I offered words, prayers, and presence. And time after time, I witnessed subtle transformations, a patient breathing easier, a worried parent finding reassurance, a nurse regaining her strength to continue her rounds. Each moment was a reminder that the unseen battle was ongoing, that hope could pierce despair, and that courage was contagious. And yet, even amidst these victories, I faced moments of deep fear. One night, the alarm sounded again. A man had collapsed in a critical ward. Machines screamed their warning. Doctors and nurses rushed, but I felt the presence of darkness, stronger and more insistent than ever. My body trembled, but Michael's voice was firm. "Extend yourself. Do not falter. The light moves through you." I focused, not on panic but on the thread of life that connected all souls in the hospital. I whispered words of power, of protection, of courage, and slowly, the monitors stabilized. The man's breathing evened. The shadow retreated. The room filled with calm. A nurse looked at me, her eyes wide. "It's incredible. You didn't touch anything, but everything changed." I only nodded, understanding that my role was no longer about physical intervention, it was about spirit, intention, and the unseen forces that flowed through those who dared to act with faith. From that moment, the hospital became a place where the veil between the natural and the spiritual seemed thinner, where hope and courage manifested in ways visible and invisible. And I realized that everything, my arrival, my illness, my visions, had been orchestrated for a purpose beyond human comprehension. And in that realization, I found peace. The days that followed were a blur of intensity, both physical and spiritual. My body, though recovering, remained fragile, yet my awareness expanded in ways that made the physical weakness feel insignificant. I could feel the currents of life moving through the hospital, an invisible network of energy linking patients, families, doctors, and nurses. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whispered word carried resonance that I could sense and, increasingly, influence. One afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the windows, I noticed a young woman in the corner, clutching her stomach and staring at the floor. Her face was pale, drawn with worry. Machines monitored her vitals, but her spirit seemed heavier than her body. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You're stronger than you know," I whispered, more instinctively than intentionally. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide with surprise. There was no reason she should have responded to me, yet she exhaled deeply and nodded. It was subtle, but I felt it, a shift, a spark of courage igniting within her. I realized then that the light I carried, guided by forces unseen, could touch others even without words, even without touch. Later, Michael appeared beside my bed, though this time in a less imposing form. "Your mission is expanding," he said. "You have been a witness, a vessel, and now you must be a guide. Some who struggle here will not understand why hope appears, but you will lead them, even gently, toward the path of endurance." I nodded. "I understand," I said, though my voice trembled. The weight of responsibility pressed on me, yet it was accompanied by a strange exhilaration. That night, the hospital became more alive than ever in ways I could not describe. I could feel energies moving, some protective, some malicious. A patient down the hall, a man in his 50s, had been battling a critical condition. Machines beeped frantically. Doctors and nurses worked with urgency, but I sensed a dark presence hovering, feeding on fear, trying to manipulate despair into surrender. I focused inwardly, drawing upon the strength Michael had instilled in me. I whispered prayers that were no longer words but pure intention, resonating from spirit to spirit. The shadow wavered. The monitors began to stabilize. Light, not visible to the human eye but palpable to the soul, flowed into the room. The man's breathing evened. The crisis passed. A nurse, exhausted and bewildered, glanced at me. "How?" I could only shake my head. Some battles are invisible, and some victories are silent. The following days deepened this reality. I began to see patterns. Some patients would recover when hope touched them, others required the unseen intervention that Michael guided me to channel. Every interaction became sacred. Every presence in the hospital carried potential for transformation. One evening, I found myself in the pediatric wing. A small boy, no older than 7, had been unresponsive for hours, his parents praying silently. I approached cautiously. Without touching him, I focused my intention, silently calling upon the presence of light, invoking protection and courage. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, his vitals stabilized. Then, he opened his eyes, looking around in wonder. His mother cried softly, relief washing over her. Michael appeared then, his presence both fierce and gentle. "Do you see now?" he said. "Even the smallest spark of courage, hope, or love can ignite life. Your role is to amplify these sparks, to ensure they do not fade in the darkness." I nodded, overwhelmed by the weight and wonder of it. As the week progressed, my own recovery advanced, yet the mission intensified. A new patient arrived, a man in critical condition after a severe accident. The doctors were concerned, the family, terrified. Shadows of despair were thick in the room. I approached, placing my hands lightly over my own heart and focusing. The presence of Michael and other unseen forces seemed to flow through me, radiating outward. Slowly, steadily, the man's vitals stabilized. The family exhaled, trembling with relief. It became clear that this was no longer about individual miracles but about shaping the spiritual environment of the hospital itself. My presence, guided by unseen forces, was altering the balance between despair and hope, between fear and courage, in ways that would ripple far beyond the walls of the building. And then came the moment that changed everything again. Late one night, alarms blared in a critical ward. Multiple patients were at risk. The staff moved frantically, but the situation felt heavier than anything I had experienced. Shadows pressed in, whispers of despair and fear attempting to seize the hearts of those involved. I felt Michael's presence, solid and unwavering, yet he remained beside me, instructing not with words but with essence: lead. Extend. Hold the line. I moved, not with my physical body, but with the energy of intention. I focused on each patient, each staff member, each frightened soul, sending courage, clarity, and hope. Slowly, the alarms eased, monitors stabilized, and the crisis passed. The next morning, the staff whispered among themselves, unsure what had occurred but aware that something extraordinary had taken place. I lay in my bed, exhausted, yet more alive than ever. Michael appeared one final time, his light illuminating the room. "You have completed the first phase," he said. "But your mission is ongoing. What you have begun here will ripple outward. Many will not understand, but the impact will be eternal. You have faced fear, embraced responsibility, and extended hope. Now, carry it forward, always." I closed my eyes, feeling a profound peace settle over me. The hospital, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a beacon of light, guided by the courage and intention of a single soul willing to act. And in that moment, I understood fully, everything had changed forever. If you wish to express your support further, you have the option to give super thanks, with contributions of up to $20. The days after that night were unlike anything I had ever known. The hospital no longer felt like a place of walls, floors, and ceilings. It had become a living organism, pulsating with unseen energy. I could sense the ebb and flow of life around me, patients fighting battles, both seen and unseen, doctors and nurses pushing against exhaustion, holding on through sheer will, families clinging to hope like fragile threads. And I, once a mere patient myself, had become part of the heartbeat of it all. The transformation I experienced was no longer private. Subtle things began to shift in ways that were almost imperceptible to the human eye. The light in patient rooms seemed softer, warmer, as if infused with a protective presence. Shadows that had once seemed oppressive receded, and even the most anxious individuals carried an aura of calm. My spirit felt intertwined with all of this, a bridge between the human and the divine. One evening, a doctor approached me quietly while checking on a patient. "You've changed," he said, almost in a whisper. "I don't know how, but something is different in your energy. People respond differently to you, they calm down. They heal, faster." I nodded slowly, realizing that my earlier visions, Michael's guidance, and the unseen intervention I had channeled were not merely internal experiences, they were affecting the world around me in real time. Later that night, I wandered the hallways alone. The hospital was quiet, yet it thrummed with life, both visible and invisible. I could sense struggles taking place in rooms where human eyes could see nothing extraordinary. A teenager in critical care fought against a rare condition, her parents praying silently. A middle-aged man lay unconscious, his soul in turmoil even as machines sustained his body. Every room held battles that were both physical and spiritual, intertwined in ways that were invisible yet undeniable. I paused outside a patient's room, feeling a heaviness that pressed against the air. Inside, a young woman clutched her chest, her breathing shallow, fear radiating off her like heat. Shadows lurked near her bed, subtle but undeniable, feeding on panic. I focused, calling upon the strength that Michael had imbued in me. My body was weak, but my spirit was resolute. Courage, I whispered, not just to her, but to the forces around us. Strength. Hope. Let it flow. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the shadows receded. Her breathing eased, the tension in the room dissipated, and light, something more than physical light, flooded the space. She opened her eyes, confusion and relief washing over her. Her parents wept quietly, sensing the shift, though they could not explain why. It was in that moment I understood the true depth of what had been entrusted to me. My presence was not merely symbolic. I was a vessel through which hope, courage, and divine intervention could manifest in the human world. Each patient I touched, each room I entered, became a microcosm of the eternal struggle between despair and light. Days turned into nights, and nights into days. Each moment became an opportunity, each encounter a chance to channel hope. Nurses and doctors began to notice subtle differences, patients responding faster, families less panicked, small crises resolved without obvious explanation. Some of them whispered among themselves, calling it intuition, luck, or coincidence. I knew better, it was the unseen, flowing through me, shaping outcomes in ways the human mind could not fully grasp. Then came the night that would forever mark the pinnacle of this experience. Multiple critical patients simultaneously deteriorated, machines alarmed, monitors flashed, and the hospital erupted into chaos. I could feel the intensity of the spiritual battle pressing against the walls, the fear and despair attempting to overwhelm every soul present. Michael appeared beside me, more radiant than ever. "Now," he said. "Extend your light further than you have ever done. Trust in the force that moves through you. Do not hesitate." I closed my eyes and focused. Every patient, every nurse, every frightened soul became a point of light in my mind. I whispered prayers of intention, sending waves of courage, healing, and protection. I felt the darkness push back, resisting, but my spirit, strengthened by every prior trial, held firm. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the crisis began to stabilize. Monitors normalized, alarms silenced, and a profound calm settled over the wards. The staff, exhausted but alive, glanced at me with awe. No one could explain what had occurred, yet the results were undeniable. Lives were saved, and the balance between despair and hope had been restored. In the quiet that followed, Michael's voice echoed softly, reassuringly, "You have taken the first steps into a larger mission. What you have done here will ripple outward in ways you cannot yet see. Continue to act with courage, faith, and love, and you will shape not only this hospital but the world beyond it." I realized then that the hospital had been a crucible, a training ground, and a proving ground. I had been forged by suffering, vision, and divine guidance. The lessons I had learned, the battles I had witnessed, and the courage I had extended were preparing me for a destiny far greater than mere recovery. And as I looked around at the quiet corridors, the sleeping patients, the tired yet hopeful staff, I understood fully, everything had changed forever. The morning that followed felt surreal. Sunlight spilled across the hospital floor, warm and golden, yet the building itself no longer felt ordinary. It hummed with life, both human and unseen. Every corridor, every room, every small movement carried significance I could sense but few could see. I walked slowly, observing nurses checking vitals, doctors conferring quietly, patients stirring with fragile hope, and I realized I had become part of the rhythm, a heartbeat within this living organism. That day, a new patient arrived, an elderly woman, frail and shivering, accompanied by a daughter who clutched her mother's hand like a lifeline. Her condition was severe, and her family's fear was palpable. As I approached, I felt a heaviness, almost a physical weight, pressing in from the air around her. Shadows of doubt, of despair, lingered like a fog. Michael appeared beside me, his presence strong yet comforting. "Extend your courage," he said. "Extend hope. She is fragile, but she can be strengthened, not only in body but in spirit." I focused, not on the fear, not on the chaos around us, but on the thread of light connecting me to her. I whispered prayers, not merely words, but intentions, carrying strength, calm, and love. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the tension in the room eased. Her breathing steadied, her hand relaxed slightly in her daughter's grasp, and a warmth seemed to ripple through the space. It was subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable. The daughter glanced at me, confusion and relief mingling in her eyes. "I don't know what happened," she whispered. I shook my head. "Some things are beyond explanation," I said softly. "Some miracles are silent." Over the next hours, I moved from room to room, sensing where hope was faltering, where fear pressed hardest, where courage needed extension. The hospital had become more than a building, it was a battlefield, a nexus of life and death, despair and light, where each soul mattered and every action resonated beyond the visible. In one room, a young man lay unconscious after an accident. His monitors flickered dangerously. Shadows pressed in, trying to exploit fear. I focused, sending energy and intention through the air, through my body, through the very essence of my being. Slowly, the monitors stabilized. His fingers twitched. Light seemed to flow subtly around him. The attending nurse looked at me, bewildered. It's like he's been touched by something beyond us." I nodded silently. Words were inadequate. This was no longer just about healing, it was about channeling unseen forces to tip the balance toward life and hope. Later that evening, the hospital became a quiet storm of energy. Patients and staff alike moved through routines that now carried deeper significance. Every small gesture, a hand held, a word spoken, a reassuring glance, was amplified by the unseen currents flowing through the building. I could sense lives being saved not only by medicine but by intention, by courage, by connection to the divine. And then came the moment that would seal the transformation, both for the hospital and for me. A massive alarm sounded, multiple patients in critical condition simultaneously. The staff rushed with urgency, their movements precise yet desperate. Shadows pressed heavily, threatening to overwhelm the light that persisted in the building. I felt Michael's presence beside me, radiating strength. "Now," he said. "Do not hesitate. Extend every ounce of courage and hope through yourself. Be the conduit." I closed my eyes, feeling the invisible currents. Each patient, each nurse, each frightened soul became a point of focus. I whispered not words but intention, sending courage, protection, and healing through the air, through the very structure of the hospital, through the threads that connected every human soul present. Slowly, the crisis eased. Monitors stabilized. Alarms ceased. Shadows receded. The hospital exhaled, as if released from a weight it had borne silently. Staff paused, exhausted but amazed, sensing without fully understanding that something extraordinary had occurred. Lives had been saved, and hope had been renewed, not just by hands and medicine, but by the intervention of forces beyond the visible, flowing through a willing human vessel. Michael appeared one final time, his light filling the room with warmth and authority. "You have fulfilled the first phase of your mission," he said. "The hospital is a microcosm of the world, and your role here has reshaped the balance of despair and hope. Carry this forward. Continue to act as a beacon. Continue to channel courage, love, and faith. What you have done here will ripple outward in ways you cannot yet see." I looked around at the quiet corridors, the sleeping patients, the tired but hopeful staff. Everything had changed, my understanding of life, the spiritual battles unseen, the power of courage and hope. I had entered the hospital expecting illness and recovery. I had emerged into a new reality, fully aware of the unseen world and my role within it. And in that realization, I knew with certainty, life would never be the same. I had been tested, transformed, and entrusted with a mission that extended far beyond my own survival. The hospital had become a sanctuary, a battlefield, and a classroom for the soul. And I had been chosen, not to rest, not to recover, but to serve as a living conduit of hope, courage, and divine light. After that night, the hospital felt different to me, as if its walls themselves had absorbed something eternal. The air carried a vibration, subtle but constant, that whispered of unseen presence. Patients, families, and staff moved through their routines, unaware that a silent, invisible network of light and hope was now flowing through the building, and through me. I realized my role had shifted. I was no longer merely a patient, recovering from illness. I had become a channel, a vessel through which courage, healing, and divine intervention could manifest. Every step I took, every word I spoke, every silent intention I held carried consequences far beyond my understanding. One morning, I walked down a corridor and saw a man sitting alone, his head in his hands. His body was frail, and his face reflected the weight of despair. I felt the shadows around him, subtle but oppressive, feeding on his fear. I approached slowly. "You are stronger than you realize," I whispered, not expecting a response, only hoping to offer a spark. He looked up, eyes wide, as if seeing something beyond the ordinary. Slowly, he straightened, taking a deep breath. I could feel the shift, a small, almost imperceptible miracle, but enough to change his trajectory in that moment. Later that day, a nurse approached me quietly. "I don't understand," she said. "Something happens when you're near patients. They calm down, they respond, even recover more quickly. It's beyond medicine." I nodded, feeling the truth of it. "It's not me alone," I replied softly. "It's something larger, flowing through us when we open ourselves to it." The following nights brought new challenges. A sudden influx of critical patients stretched the staff to their limits. The alarms were relentless, the halls filled with urgency and fear. I felt the pull of despair, strong and heavy, pressing against the walls. Yet alongside it, I sensed the presence of angels, guiding, protecting, and amplifying the courage I could channel. Michael appeared beside me, his form radiant and unwavering. "Extend your light further than you have before," he said. "Do not falter. Each soul in this place depends on courage, hope, and faith, even those who do not yet understand it." I focused, moving through the wards not with my physical strength but with spiritual intention. I whispered prayers of hope and protection, sending waves of courage into rooms where panic threatened to take hold. I could feel shadows resisting, pressing back, but I held firm. Slowly, imperceptibly, monitors stabilized, alarms ceased, and calm returned. Lives had been saved, not merely by medicine, but by the unseen flow of light through human intention. Over the following days, I began to notice more subtle changes. Patients who had been despondent found renewed strength. Families whispered gratitude, sensing that something extraordinary had occurred even if they could not explain it. Staff moved with more confidence, buoyed by a quiet but powerful energy that seemed to flow through the building. I spent hours in reflection, understanding that the hospital had become a crucible not just for physical healing, but for spiritual awakening. I had been transformed, yes, but more importantly, I had become a vessel through which light, courage, and hope could manifest in the human world. One evening, I sat quietly by the